Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Seventh Son. When I first started Seventh Son, I kind of thought, well, maybe this is a B fantasy film, and I'm okay with that. I kind of realized after a little bit it was worse than a B fantasy film, and then it became clear it was kind of like a paint-by-numbers fantasy film. So laughably, horribly paint-by-numbers. It was kind of fun. Like, I liked the actors reading off this incredibly cliched dialogue and hearing a ridiculous performance from Jeff Bridges, which I kind of liked. I thought maybe this will be a ridiculously stupid good time, like a so bad it's good kind of movie. I could be down with that. I was in the mood for that. And then Seventh Son continued destroying all good vibes in its wrath, continuing on to be worse and worse through its incredibly boring, banal, and horrible 100 minutes. This guy who's called a spook, played by Jeff Bridges, this isn't a racial slur or anything. It's this kind of like Doctor Strangey type kind of witch mystical hunter that he plays, who in this fantasy world is called a spook. And after his previous apprentice is killed early in the film by Julianne Moore's character, he needs to get a new apprentice who has to be the seventh son of a seventh son, because I guess people had like a lot of sons back then. So he finds this one guy and he becomes his new apprentice, and he has to train him in a week before the blood moon comes in full and the witches will come and destroy everything for a couple of days and send the world back for 100 years unless Jeff Bridges and his new apprentice, played by Ben Barnes, very blandly and with no kind of chemistry between him, they try to destroy these witches and her evil army before they take over the world so he can become a better spook's apprentice. One of the things about fantasy films or sci-fi films or any weirder concepts where you have all sorts of characters with strange names and whole worlds that have all these characters with different kind of names and kingdoms and all sorts of crazy situations going on, you really have to be very clear and explicit with the audience about what's going on. And I think why there's so few good fantasy movies is because most of them fail to do that, and so the only people who really get them are the people who've read the book the movie is based on or have seen it far too many times. And so Seventh Son really falls in line with that. The story is pretty terribly told, and they don't really get into what exactly is going on with everything. They tell you some things and then don't tell you things, then bring them up later. The shot composition is pretty horrible, so there's certain scenes early on that mean one thing, but you don't really know until someone tells you later. Particularly all the action sequences, which should be the thing that's supposed to wow you, or any sequence that is made to wow you, fails pretty miserably because you can't tell what's going on. And it's not done in the way like Taken 3 where it's incomprehensible, and it's not as horrible as something that this film could probably be compared to, which is Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. It's better than that, but it's done in these ways where it's not like they're cutting too much, it's just like they don't understand how to compose a good action sequence, or much really in terms of storytelling. It feels like they just didn't spend enough time on certain shots and really understood that this was a crap movie for most of it, except for maybe Jeff Bridges, who I think gives a pretty fun performance in this film. It's kind of like his Rooster type of character, but at least you can tell he's trying to do something different from what everyone else is doing, which is just blandly playing in a fantasy epic. That kind of seems to be everyone else's performance, whereas Jeff Bridges seems to be having fun with this bizarre character that sounds like he always has stuff in his mouth. But I kind of liked him for the most part. He's definitely the best performance in this film. That's not saying much, but he is. Same with Julianne Moore. They were the two actors who seemed like they're actually kind of having fun with it. It showed that both Julianne Moore and Jeff Bridges are such great actors because they can even do pretty interesting performances in something as horrible as Seventh Son. I think that speaks pretty highly of them. Kit Harington is in the beginning of the film. I thought for a second it was another example of him picking a pretty horrible role, but it turns out, as I read up on it, he actually shot this, since this was shot like 3 or 4 years ago, he shot this either before Game of Thrones had aired or before he was cast in Game of Thrones. That I'm not sure about. Either way, he wasn't who he is now, so it wasn't cool casting where they killed off a famous person early on to kind of show you anyone can die. It was just kind of coincidence. Apparently the original book that this is based on is like kind of scarier and spookier or something something that this film doesn't really get into. Unfortunately, it's just kind of doing a normal kind of fantasy epic, just badly directed. I grew up with films like Willow, and I love the Lord of the Rings films, and I wouldn't mind someone else making a really good fantasy film. You never get a director who really has a knack for it, who really has a love for it. They're usually just directors who want to make a big, expensive movie, and it doesn't seem to matter what kind of material, and they don't even really want everyone to leave and understand exactly what kingdoms everyone's from and all the crazy names all these characters have. They just kind of want to hit you with as much stuff as possible in this kind of insecure direction way, and that's really what's going on here. This film was on a shelf for like 3 years, and you can really see why, because it's just so clumsily made and just doesn't really seem to get into the fantasy genre. Too much of the dialogue is used for exposition. It doesn't really have any character moments, isn't really concerned with that. It's more of a plot-centric film, but the plot's so disorganized. What you're getting is a film that has no enjoyable qualities. Really, it's just ruining all of that to badly tell this fantasy story. With fantasy stuff, you really have to have a great direction so you can get an audience in, because through audiences having seen so many terrible fantasy films, with any kind of story, you'll want better direction and better story to make it work. And Seventh Son is no different than any of those. I guess this was made because of things like The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and they wanted to cash in on that. And it feels in a way like all of those other kind of cash in, like YA films or comic book films, where a studio's not fully committed to it and creatively and financially. And so what you get is a middling crap movie that if you had a director who cared a lot more and really understood how to do these type of things, you could have a really cool movie that the studio didn't really have as much faith in as they could have. We rarely get that lucky, and Seventh Son kind of plays into all the worst aspects of what we expect from the fantasy genre. Films like this don't help fantasy or science fiction or big budget films. They hinder it because people see this and they go, oh, this is stupid. See, all these films are stupid. I can't really defend if someone had only seen this film and thought, oh, well, I don't want to get into more fantasy films, because honestly, if this is the only fantasy film I had seen, I really wouldn't want to watch many more of them either. It's the kind of movie that you're not surprised it got shelved in the first place. I want to shelve it in my memory and hopefully forget it, lose it somewhere. The experience of watching this was so defeating, because at first I thought maybe this would be fun, so bad it's good kind of thing, and it really kind of rubbed me that way for a while. But then it became pretty clear it was just an awful movie. And for a little bit, I was watching it, and I was watching Jeff Bridges and his apprentice do stuff, and I was like, oh, maybe I should feed the cats earlier if I get home later tomorrow. And then I was like, oh, right, I'm watching this movie. Okay, so they're doing a bunch of boring stuff, and I'm like, oh, have I paid my cable bill? Maybe I should do that. I couldn't pay attention to it because my subconscious was like, this is too horrible to even accept, because it's just so blandly, badly directed. It just represents the worst in Hollywood filmmaking. Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters was probably worse, but worse in the way that like actively made you kind of give a shit. Like the amount of fucks I gave by the end of this film was substantially less than at the beginning of this film, and there weren't that many at the beginning. This is the kind of film that beats you down and ruins any interest you could have had in the movie and takes it away and spits it right back out at you. By that point, you just don't even really care about any of it, because this movie doesn't care about trying to introduce you to it or tell you the story. So why should you even try to care about a film like Seventh Son? So if you have seen Seventh Son and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.